Mr. President.
Senator from Kansas.
Mr. President, I ask unanimous consent to address the Senate up to 20 minutes.
Without objection.
Mr. President, thank you very much. I was on the Senate floor this morning and outlined the merits of an amendment that I've tried to have pending to this continuing resolution. It's amendment number 55. It's an amendment that deals with the air traffic control tower program that the Obama administration has indicated that they will terminate this program on April the 7th. And I don't want to go over all the things I talked about this morning, but I do want to talk about how we got to the point that we are today, in which apparently this amendment is not going to be considered by the United States Senate. I indicated this morning about how, in my view, how important this amendment is. I read from an AP story from Chicago about that air safety was in jeopardy, indications that a plane crash that had occurred previously would not have occurred if there had been an air traffic control tower present. The complaint by Americans that our aviation sector is so frustrated by the political brinksmanship that goes on in Washington, D.C. Again, this is an important amendment that's about the safety and security of American people, particularly those who fly. And it is amazing to me that despite continued efforts to bring this amendment to the floor for consideration, not that I expect any guarantee, there's no such thing as a guarantee that this amendment would pass, but the inability to have it even considered is very troubling to me and very surprising to me. Last week when we started on the continuing resolution, I was pleased to hear what the majority leader said about the process on the CR. And this isn't years ago, this isn't months ago, this is just last week, in which the leader said this: there will be amendments offered, and he's talking about the continuing resolution. There will be amendments offered. We're working on a process to consider those amendments. This week, we'll be off to another opportunity for the Senate to return to regular order, an opportunity for this body to legislate through cooperation, through compromise, as we used to do. This legislation will be a test of the Senate's goodwill. We're anxious to move forward and start doing some legislating. We are going to take all amendments and try to work through them as quickly as we can. I hope we can move forward and set up votes on every one of them. Mr. President, that's the announcement that was made as we started the continuing resolution. And as the majority leader indicated, this legislation will be a test of the Senate's goodwill. Well, Mr. President, I think the Senate has clearly failed the test of goodwill, but more than goodwill, we are failing the American people in taking the steps necessary to secure their safety. This is not an amendment about me. It's not an amendment about Kansas. Certainly my home state, nothing wrong with representing your home state, is affected by the loss of these control towers. But 42 states, 43 states, almost all of us have control towers in our states, and come April the 7th, they no longer will be. And it's one of the reasons, and I've indicated this previously, one of the reasons that I thought this amendment, perhaps above others, should be considered, because the control tower program will be eliminated April the 7th. I'm a member of the Appropriations Committee. I'm a member of the Subcommittee on Transportation. I will work to see that these programs are continued once we get to the regular appropriation process. The CR is behind us. But my colleagues and I will never have the chance to do that, because in a matter of just a few short days, the control towers will be gone. They will be closed. The lights will be turned off. And so my role as an appropriator, my role as a member of the United States Senate, that I share with 99 other senators, the idea that we would then come back and restart a program that has disappeared, it just isn't going to happen. And so in the absence of this amendment passing, in the absence of this amendment being considered and passing, the ability for me to do my job on behalf of a program that I think matters to the American people, it disappears. And I've never tried to be a difficult member. I believe in collegiality. I believe in the goodwill that the majority leader talks about. But this is an amendment. I can't imagine what I was supposed to have done. It's an amendment that's germane. It's not here trying to offer an amendment that doesn't matter to the bill at hand. I'm not trying to score political points. I'm not trying to put Democrats on the line for casting a vote that the voters might object to. There's nothing here that is political or partisan in nature. I did what I thought I was supposed to do. There are 26 co-sponsors of this amendment. More than half are Democrats. They are Senator Roberts, Inhofe, Blumenthal, Blunt, Johans, Kirk, Manchin, Hagan, Klobuchar, Baucus, Tester, Enzi, Vitter, Bozeman, Pryor, Merkley, Wyden, Kane, Warner, Ayotte, Shaheen, Risch, Crapo, Murphy, Rockefeller, and Wicker. If 26 of us in that group can agree upon the value of amendment, why is it that the Senate can't even take a vote on an amendment, on a germane amendment broadly supported outside the chamber of this Senate? Aircraft Owners and Pilots Association, National Business Aviation Association, National Air Transport Association, Association of Air Medical Services. They believe this is important for the ability to life watch patients. NATCA, the Air Traffic Controllers Association, the American Association of Airport Executives. This is not a provincial issue that Moran is about, something about trying to take care of himself. It's not about trying to create political difficulties for anybody. We broadly agree in a bipartisan basis that this amendment should be made in order. Now, Mr. President, I've only been in the Senate for a little more than 2 years. I served for a number of years in the House of Representatives. And one of the things that I thought was true, one of the reasons I sought the opportunity to serve in the United States Senate was it would be different than the House. Any member of the United States Senate, and we all ought to be here on behalf of every other Republican or Democrat senator on behalf of their ability to offer amendments. You know, we had a debate about changing the rules. And the suggestion was made, the proffer was made that if we would agree to change the rules, that amendments would be made in order. I thought that was a positive development. And now it seems to me, while I left the House in hopes of having the opportunity to represent my constituents as best as I knew how and to represent America as best as I know how, somebody stands in my way. I can't find out who that is. I've not talked to a senator who's not supportive of my amendment. Every conversation I have is, well, I think it's a good idea. I don't know why it's not being made in order. There is no good explanation. Who sits down and develops the list that decides which amendment is important and which one isn't? This ought to be something that's not turned over to a one-person rules committee. Again, the House and Senate are structured differently. This is a historic body with a legacy of allowing debate, discussion, and amendment. And again, not for purposes outside even the nature of the bill we're talking about. How can it be controversial to transfer $50 million in a bill that is more than $1 trillion of funding, of spending? How can it be so difficult to transfer $50 million from two accounts, unencumbered balances, a research account, to save air traffic control towers, leave them in place until I at least get the opportunity to work with my colleagues to extend their life through the appropriations and legislative process into the future? So, Mr. President, for a senator like me, I laid awake last night from, 3:15 to 4:30, trying to figure out what is it that I can say that would convince my colleagues to support this amendment, or to allow whoever is making the decision that it can't be even debated and heard and voted on. And I don't know that there's any magic words. It does concern me, it bothers me greatly, that we ought to all be here protecting the rights of each and every other senator. This is important to us as a legislative body, not to us and our egos as senators. It's not that we ought to have it's not that sense that we have the right to say everything and we're senators, we're important and powerful people. It's that on behalf of the American people, a person like me who represents 2.5 million Kansans ought to have the ability to bring an amendment to a bill on the United States Senate floor that is germane. Had we brought these amendments forward, had we agreed to debate and pass my amendment, we wouldn't be here today still stalled on moving forward to conclude this business and move to the budget. We could have debated the amendments and voted on the amendments that were germane days ago. But for some reason, we once again get bogged down in somebody deciding this amendment qualifies to be considered and this one doesn't. So, Mr. President, this is another example of where, again, I guess if you'd tell this story to the American people, we're going to pass today a bill that spends $1.1 trillion And what? We've had 4 or 5 amendments offered and perhaps approved, maybe a couple of more today. This bill has not worked its way through the Appropriations Committee. It comes from the House and we immediately take it up. And it's written so perfectly that only 3 or 4 individual senators have the opportunity to alter the bill, have not the guarantee to change the bill, but the opportunity to suggest to my colleagues, would you listen to me and say, does this make sense or not, and cast a vote yes or no based upon whether what I'm saying has merit. We can't get to the point in which I've given the opportunity to explain here on the Senate why this bill, why this amendment is something that's important. So I came to the Senate from the United States House in hopes that the Senate was different, in which individual members had value unrelated to their relationship with the Speaker or the Minority Leader of the House, unrelated to my relationship with the members of the Rules Committee. I've not always been the most perfect follower of my political party. I've tried to do what I think is right, and therefore I've not always developed the relationship I needed in the House to be able to get my amendments considered on the House floor. The Rules Committee is there for a purpose. It's a very unwieldy body, the United States House of Representatives with 435 members. Here, we have 100. Surely, based upon the history, the legacy, the rules of the United States Senate, we have the ability as United States Senators, whether we're in favor or disfavor, whether our amendment meets with a person's satisfaction or not, on behalf of the American people, we have the right to represent their interests and have votes taken. And the majority leader said the other day that I'm an obstructionist. I laid awake last night thinking, I'm not an obstructionist, I'm following the rules. The majority leader said this morning that we need to show that sequestration is so damaging to the country. I didn't even vote for sequestration, and yet I can't fix a problem that's caused by somebody else's vote. Again, it is so baffling to me how this works. I finally found somebody who would tell me they oppose my amendment. Today I talked to the Secretary of Transportation, who says the administration opposes your amendment. And so maybe that's the explanation. I've asked my colleagues on both sides of the aisle, why can't I, a person who followed the rules, who did what one would think you should do to get amendment made in order, why can't this amendment be heard? The only explanation that I guess makes sense is that there are those in Washington, D.C. who want to prove that you cannot cut spending without consequences that are dramatic. Okay, prove that point. Come to the floor, have the debate about spending, about budgets, about taxes. Have this conversation about, can we afford to cut spending? Prove to us, take the votes, demonstrate that it can't be done. But to use sequestration as the example for why we can never cut any money from any program, particularly on the amendment that I'm offering, is dangerous. What it says is we want to make a political point as compared to worrying about the lives of American people who fly. And so, Mr. President, this circumstance I find myself in, again this morning laying in bed realizing that the radicalization of Senator Moran is occurring. The only way, apparently, to get your amendments heard is to be difficult. It's not my personality, it's not my nature, but on behalf of Kansans and Americans, if what it takes is for me to become more difficult to deal with so that my amendments are considered, it's not about me personally, but so amendments that matter to my constituents and at least what I view to America can be heard, you got to make yourself a pain around here. Well, if that's what's required in the Senate, I hope that's not the case. And I hope the majority leader is right that this is the path in which we're going to get back to regular order. I want to be a member of the Appropriations Committee that works, that debates, discusses. We listen to witnesses and we figure out we can spend more money here, but we have to spend less money here. This program matters. This one is inefficient. I voted against sequestration because I don't believe across-the-board cuts are responsible. What that means is that everything deserves the same reduction. There are things that we do well and do that are appropriate for the government to be involved in, and there are things we do poorly and the government shouldn't be involved in, and yet we treat them all the same. I want to be a member of the Appropriations Committee that says we're going to evaluate each one of these programs and make decisions about spending, and we're going to choose to spend money here and not here, or the decision will be made by the Senate and the House and the President that we're going to raise revenues so that we can spend more money, but that's not a reason to block this amendment. It's not a reason to say that those people who are going to be traveling out of 179 airports that have control towers, their lives are going to be less safe and secure and run the potential of loss of life and injury. as a result of us trying to prove a point that we apparently can't cut budgets around here because we want to show that there is damage to be done when that occurs. That's a very dangerous political point.
Senator, yield.
I would yield.
Yeah, first of all, as a co-sponsor of the amendment, I'm glad you're getting around to the merits of this. Yes, it's a great injustice that you're going through. The senator is going through right now, not getting his amendment held. I have to tell you, though, as probably the only active commercial pilot in here, I jumped on this bill because a lot of people don't realize that the contract towers are just as in need of control as the non-contract towers. The University of, the senator is aware, the University of Oklahoma is in Norman, Oklahoma. That's a contract tower. I've gone in there before where they're using all three runways at the same time. It's a huge issue. But what I want to ask you is, why is it that when the bureaucracy is opposed to something, they, number one, won't tell you about it. Number two, they go whispering to the president. Number three, they go whispering to other people out here. I went through this same thing, I suggest to my friend from Kansas, when I passed the Pilot's Bill of Rights. It's when I had 67 co-sponsors in the United States Senate, and they wouldn't bring it up for an entire year. They never would bring it up, and we had to Rule 14 on the floor. Now, that's what's wrong. When you have something that everybody is for, it's a good thing, but somehow, in this case, I know what it is. Same thing that happened to me. I got mine passed. It took me a year to do it. Well, best of luck. And I would only say to you, that this is the time to stay in there and fight for this, because this is a great example to use. Everything that's being cut in government right now, all these people who had to wait in line to get in here, there's no reason to do that. Everything that people really want and that's popular, this is what they cut. And so you're a victim of that, and let's stay in there and try to make it happen.
I think that reclaiming my time, I thank the gentleman from Oklahoma and know that he has great expertise on the topic of aviation and airports and airplanes. Again, Mr. President, I'm here to decry a system that is failing. And while it is personally troublesome to me, it bothers me. It's embarrassing not to be able to accomplish something that seems so straightforward and simple. We all like to have victories, but it's not really about me. Every member of the United States Senate ought to have the opportunity to present germane amendments and let the will of the Senate, let those of us, 99 other people than me, make a decision based upon the merits. However we all make decisions around here on whether we vote for or against something, this is not about my right as an individual senator as it is about the rights of all of us on behalf of the American people, on behalf of our home state constituencies, to be able to do our jobs. And if there is a political game afloat that is preventing this amendment from being considered, then I would suggest that we have transversed that plane in which we no longer are caring for Americans, but we're caring about our own political skills, our own political re-election, as compared to what we are here to do. This place is way too political. This is not a political amendment. It ought to be made in order. And yet, despite all the efforts, it has not occurred. And I hope in the few minutes that remain, there's still a chance that my unanimous consent request would be agreed to. And I appreciate the others who were able, the handful of folks who were able to offer their amendments. I think we ought to have more of that, not less. It's about the Senate doing its job, not just about Moran not being able to accomplish his on this particular day. I appreciate the indulgence of my colleagues. And I would yield to the senator from Pennsylvania.